Chris, you talked about the corporate state and how that is holding us back, holding back progress. And could you please unpack that term a little bit and explain to us how the corporate state is holding back progress that vegans are working on, that animal rights activists are working on? Eunice pointed to a few things, including ag-gag laws and so forth. You're going a bit further, saying we can't use the older forms of democracy to make progress and fight back those things anymore. Something else is needed. You're calling for revolution against the corporate state. Help us understand how to get there, sir.
Well, you can look just in the vegan movement itself, the extent to which the animal agriculture industry has bought off all of the major environmental and health nonprofits in the country, from the American Heart Association to the Sierra Club to anything else. That's how you get $25 million in fossil fuel money going to the Sierra Club, and they run around talking about natural gas as a bridge to clean energy system. That's how you get the American Health or the American Heart Association on their website, which is in the film and Eunice's book, posting recipes with pork or dairy products or anything else. This corporate coup d'etat, which was unleashed in the early 1970s in reaction to the empowerment of all sorts of peoples, feminists, environmentalists, African Americans, and finally giving them a voice in our society. And I think Howard Zinn has done a very good job in The People's History of the United States of explaining how we were never set up as a democracy. Read the Federalist Papers. The framers of the Constitution were terrified of democracy, and if you want to know what the kinds of people they were, you can walk up the staircase of this mausoleum to white supremacy, including up at the top of one of the stairs, Major A.H. Baird in his Confederate uniform. That's where we came from, and it has been a long battle in a lot of lives. We had the bloodiest labor wars in U.S. history in order to open up that space. And just as we saw on the eve of World War I, the rise of powerful populist movements that were crushed, subsequently the same was true in the 1960s, and corporations began to pump massive sums of money, and it all was laid out. The blueprint from it was the 1971 Lewis Powell memo, with the only two people that are named in the memo are Herbert Marcuse for apparently taking over our universities, and Ralph Nader, and that's what happened. So we've been sold this false ideology, utopian ideology of neoliberalism, that societies should kneel before the dictates of the marketplace, that somehow this is rational, and we've seen the consequences of it. But all of our institutions, including the Democratic Party, have become beholden to corporate power. The tragedy of the last election is that we had a candidate, Bernie Sanders, who would have demolished Trump in the general election, but the Democratic Party elites...
Bernie would have won.
The Democratic Party elites, and if we took away all of the Clintons' dark money, corporate money, she wouldn't have stood a chance, and these figures like Schumer and Pelosi would have all disappeared. But they fixed the system, whether it was by denying the right of independent voters to vote in primaries, and most of Bernie's young supporters were independent voters, stealing the Nevada caucus, and at this point, we don't have any time left, as Eunice said, because of the rapid disintegration of the ecosystem. We have to begin to build mass movements that frighten those in power. That is how power works. It's a game of fear. There is a passage in Henry Kissinger's memoirs, do not buy the book, where Kissinger and Nixon are standing in the White House. There's a huge, tens of thousands of people in an anti-war demonstration surrounding the White House. Nixon has put empty city buses end to end as a kind of protection to circle the White House, and he's looking out the window going, Henry, they're going to break through the barricades and get us, and that's where we want people in power to be. That's not going to happen until, and I've lived in France. What was the check on Sarkozy, who was in many ways as much a cretin as Trump? It was the fact that the farmers would drive their tractors into the center of Paris and shut down all the streets. My son did graduate work, my older son, in Paris, and I said, why don't you go ask these French students what they would do if they had to go into debt for $30,000 or $40,000 a year to go to college. Well, you know just what they do, that they shut the damn country down. And that's precisely, we have to regain that kind of militancy. The failure on the left is that it forgot that it's not our job to take power. It is our job to hold power in check. Power is always the problem. Who was the last liberal president in the United States? Richard Nixon. Not because he was a liberal or had a heart, but because he was frightened of movements. That's how we got the EPA, it's how we got OSHA, all this legislation written by Nader, by the way. It's how, he even proposed universal health care. We have to reassert and regain our power. And that's not going to come by putting blind faith into institutions like the Democratic Party that have surrendered to corporate interests.
Thank you, Chris.
Is a serious problem in the movement is we've got a movement that basically tells people to go ahead and promote happy exploitation or reduced exploitation or whatever as a morally good thing. I think that's nonsense. We would never do that in the human context. And Chris was talking about how corporations have bought off the environmental movement and the health movement. They've also bought off the animal movement. In 2005, something incredible happened. Peter Singer, the father of the so-called animal rights movement, together with PETA and Farm Sanctuary and Compassion Over Killing and Mercy for Animals and Viva and all these other groups, signed a letter, a public letter, expressing appreciation and support to John Mackey and Whole Foods for their pioneering, I think was the adjective that was used, system of happy exploitation. And what's happened with the movement in this country is they've been bought out too. And they are not willing to promote veganism as a moral baseline because they're just getting too much support from the exploitation industries. And they're getting too much support from people. Look, if you care about animals, but you want to continue eating that stuff, what do you want? You want one of these experts, one of these large organizations to say, you know what? That's okay. As long as you care, as long as you eat a little bit less, as long as you buy a little bit happier, you're a good person. You're doing the right thing. And you know what you do? You say, yeah, that's right. And you write them a check. And that's why it's all gone to hell. And that's why we've got to resurrect it. And as Chris says, this is not something that's going to happen as a result of some organization. This is something we've got to do as individuals. And we can do it.